Hello, Straight No Chaser with Dr. Julius Bailey fans. We welcome Dr. Regina Bradley. She is the assistant professor of English and African American Studies at Kennesaw State University in Georgia. She is also the co-host of the Southern Hip Hop podcast, Bottom of the Map. She is the author of a forthcoming book entitled Chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip Hop South. She is the foremost authority on outcasts outside of them themselves in America. I am so excited to be able to bring you Dr. Regina Bradley.
Hip hop is a tool for us to move past 1968. It is also a tool for us to recognize the illegibility of contemporary Southern Black experiences. We realize that we're the social outcasts, right? Speaking of outcasts, there were two in particular that I'm thinking about. A certain Mr. Antoine Big Boy Patton, who's from Savannah's, because remember, we pluralize everything in the South, Savannah's. And a certain Mr. Andre 3000 Benjamin, who are better known as outcasts. And their body of work in music is powerful in the fact that they took this idea of being outcast, being rejected, and utilized that to move past something that is considered Southness, which is the connection of ideas, experiences, realities to the physical region we know as the South, to Southernness, which is the conceptualization of the South, right? The ability to create worlds outside of the physical, cultural, and historical renderings of what it means to be Southern. And this really came to a head at the 1995 Source Hip Hop Magazine Awards. It was in New York. We already in trouble. And they won for Best New Duo for their first album, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music. Say that 3 times fast. And they're coming on stage, and all you hear is this booing in the background, and the booing is getting, louder and louder. And if you could boo in a New York dialect, it'd probably be like, boo, son. And Big Boy is like, we appreciate y'all letting us in your city, right? And trying to be diplomatic. And then Andre 3000 comes over, and he says a particular phrase that has become the battle cry for contemporary Southern Black folks. The South got something to say. And when he said the South got something to say, he didn't say it with an expiration date on it. He said the South got something to say then in 95 and now in 2017. And hip hop is the access point to do that. So when we say the mountaintop ain't flat, it's not a bad thing. We realize that. But on the one hand, hip-hop helps us realize, yes, we have come a long way. But it's also a representation, yes, we still have a very long way to go.
Okay then, Dr. Bradley. So Big Boy stated it. What does the South have to say?
Everything. No, I just feel like, it's interesting. We're in this current moment where the South influences hip hop to the point where the South is just mainstream hip hop now. There is no need for regional identity in the ways that it was in the 90s and the early 2000s. So it's kind of like the work that was done in the 90s and early 2000s has made way for the new generations of artists, because there are multiple generations of Southern hip hop artists now, right? That we currently hear on the radio waves. And I think with the work that I'm trying to do is, and it's the same thing with the Academy, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're always 50, 11 million years behind whatever's going on in the culture. So, I'm writing about stuff that happened in 95, 96, and we're in 2020, you know what I'm saying? And I'm still considered to be recent, you know what I mean? So in terms of what the pop has to say, I feel like, we've been saying it with the music, and now with Chronicling Stankonia and with a lot of the younger academics and journalists and stuff that are coming out, we're playing catch up in terms of showing what the South got to say and how they've been saying it for the last 20, 30 years.
So, this is just, as we think about you as a professor, as a teacher, as a scholar, what would we come, or what can we expect if we were to take a class with you or to study with you?
The same that title is your show. You know what I mean? It's all straight, no chaser. You know what I mean? I don't sugarcoat. You know what I'm saying? I feel like students come in to hear the real in ways that they probably wouldn't get in other classes on campus. So it depends on what I'm teaching, actually. But the keep it 100 is universal across the board. So it doesn't matter if I'm teaching survey of African American literature, whether I'm teaching the Outcast class. I love teaching the Outcast class the first day because, you know, it depends on the semester, actually. So like the first time I taught it at Kennesaw State in spring 2017, or spring 2018, it was a whole lot of Outcast scholars in the class. So it was like, you know, let's see if she really can back up what she's talking about, what she's theorizing. That was the fun part of it. You know what I'm saying? I had to school the babies. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you heard about them on this little stream service. I was there when it was brand new on the radio. Shut up.
Right.
So, you know, or like this last semester, I had a lot of students who were not familiar with Outkast and were not familiar with Southern hip hop. So it was kind of like, let me take you by the hand, but I'm still throw you in the deep end. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to tell you how to listen to the music, what to think about the music, you know, listen to it, let's have a conversation about it and put into a larger context about literature, cultural studies, African-American studies. And that's always been a really useful way for me to approach the classroom.
Obviously, we just want to kind of have a conversation about how do you define the trap and its genealogy.
Okay, so I don't know, man. I feel like I should be wearing a shirt that say trap purist. You know what I'm saying? Because most of the trap stuff that I listen to is, I feel like my cutoff date is like 2008. And the reason I say 2008 is because that's when I started graduate school. And when you start graduate school, you know, everything fall apart. So, but I mean, like in terms of I guess trying to define it, I think about the trap as a cultural subgenre. And depending on where you're from, if you're from Memphis, you say it's gonna start in Memphis with like 3 6 and DJ Paul. But I'm from Georgia, down south Georgia girl for life in Atlanta. So I'm gonna say, because it's my interview, that you know, trap as we know it started in Atlanta. And the interesting thing about it is that it speaks to a particular set of experiences that often get pushed to the side in favor of this romanticized idea about how the South has progressed. And what trap music does is a gritty reminder that no, everything wasn't taken care of. You know what I'm saying? So again, depending on who you're talking to, but I mean, like for me, I think about Pocket Full of Stones with UGK in 1992. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That seems to be the go-to for a lot of the trap pioneers that we hear that like we were listening to Pocket Full of Stones. You know what I'm saying? In Atlanta in particular, I think it's interesting because you got folks like Kilo Ali with Cocaine in 1990, but he wasn't like talking about trap how we knew it. It probably wasn't until, at least I think it wasn't until Cujo Goody on Thought Process in 1995 that we started formulating what we think trap is the way we think about it now. You know what I'm saying? So 95 with Cujo Goody, and then Outkast comes out with Will Still in 96 on ATLiens, and Big Boy is like, you know, don't go to the trap and ask questions. You bring up the trap again in 98, Spodio the Dopalicious. You got Backbone with Concrete Law in 2001, which comes out a couple of months before I'm Serious by T.I., but it wasn't until trap music in 03 that we finally have a term to define this drug culture influence with, you know, with trap. And, you know, I know that Brother Harris been around here saying that he started trap. I don't agree with that.
Brother Harris. The Reverend Dr. Brother Harris.
the good Brother Harris.
Professor Harris now, right?
What? But no. I mean, yeah, you know, he branded it. Yes, like I can't deny that. Like he branded it with trap music in 03, and then you have Jeezy with, you know, Thug Motivation 101 in 2005. You know what I'm saying? And that introduces that gritty, dark, synthesizer element that we hear, you know what I'm saying? So that got Shawty Red, you know what I mean? So it's like all of these things, and you know, again, Georgia, so Gucci Mane, right, you know what I mean? Then you get into the new folks, you know, like the Gottis and the Futures and the Migos and Lil Babies and all the babies. There's like 50-11 babies.
Oh,
Lil Baby, Yo Mama's Baby. You know what I'm saying? Like,
come get your baby.
Come get your baby. Right.
Shoot, you know what I mean?
No, that's right. No, that's a problem for history. And it's just important, you know, because as you know, you and I are both in the classroom, and she's a parent of a teen, and so we hear all these stories of these young people talk about they know what trap is, and we look at them like they done lost their mind. You know what I'm saying?
No, I mean, especially as a parent now, you know what I'm saying? Like, I have a 19-year-old, you know what I mean? And, she don't try it or me, but when she's feeling frisky, I have to remind her, your mother grew up in the era.
Right.
Your mother grew up in the era of the 360s and the little, listen, this ain't what you want. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't get twisted.
Right. Now, that's interesting. Speaking of 666, let me just kind of ask you this kind of question. So, I enter into hip hop, quite frankly, and I'm gonna be honest with the audience. I enter into hip hop in the late '90s with Project Pat and Mystical. As a strange introduction, but that's how I came into it, right?
Everybody got to get in.
So, I then migrated to Goody Mob and the Memphis Boys and 8 Ball and MJG.
Right.
And I think to me, all of those sort of together, they just, to me, sounded like my roots, some good old Baptist ministers or some deacons with a beat behind them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, call me crazy, but can you speak to at least, either A, have I lost my mind? Or B, if I got something going on there, is there sort of an old black blues-like condition that those members that I've talked about and others have been speaking to that's a little bit different, for instance, in Southern hip hop than a lot of those Atlanta boys and T.I. Luda and Outkast and stuff like that?
I mean, yeah. You can't be from Tennessee and not be influenced by the blues aesthetic. You know what I mean? You too close to Mississippi, first of all, to not have none of that good old, red Delta clay rub off on your music. But no, I mean, it speaks to the point that, the South is not a monolith, which means that if it's not a monolith, there is no cookie cutter definition of Southern hip hop. You know what I mean? And it's exactly what you're kind of pointing out is that, if you're from Georgia, you're going to hear that funk influence. You're going to hear the gospel influence. You know what I mean? Like that whole backwoods deacon thing that CeeLo Green does. You know what I'm saying? Right. Some revival type stuff. You go to Tennessee, of course you're going to hear that blues, especially in the bass of somebody like 8 Ball and MJG.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And if you're in Louisiana, you're gonna hear the jazz influence, you're gonna hear the bounce influence. If you're in Texas, you're gonna hear that West Coast influence because they're so much closer to California than because they're west of the Mississippi. You know what I mean? So I think that the multiple influences that you hear in Southern hip hop are a reflection of the complexities of Southern Black experiences that often get pushed to the side in favor of this idea that, if it doesn't check off these boxes, then it's not considered to be Southern hip hop, which is bull. You know what I mean? There are multiple genres of Southern hip hop. And I try to make sure that I tell my students that. It's like, it depends on where you are. Because even within the same state, like I'm from Georgia, but Atlanta is different than Albany.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like if you were to put Outkast in conversation with Field Mob, for example, okay, because Benny, you know what I mean? You're going to hear more of that rural twang, that bluesy folk experience that you hear in the way that Field Mob delivers in ways that Outkast also pulls on that. You know what I mean? Like D'Angelo Robinson calls it country cosmopolitanism. You know what I mean? Where it's like you take the best of both worlds and create this new product of Southernness. Right. And Outkast is like the theoreticians of that. You know what I'm saying? So being able to work through that, but it still speaks to the point that depending on where you are, you're going to hear the local influences, the local flavors. And then once that becomes part of a larger conversation, ideally, it'll show you how dope and how complicated Southern hip hop is. Ideally, you know what I mean? But folks don't want ideal. They want commercial.
Right. That's true. I think Tony just talked about that in her interview, just the idea that most of us are just connected to about 5 or 10% of what hip hop really is.
Right. It's a culture, you know what I'm saying? And in the same way that it's a cultural thing in New York or on the West Coast, hip hop is a cultural thing in the South. It just roots differently. You know, if you want me to show how country I am, it take root different.
Take a root.
You know what I'm saying? Different. You know what I mean? They gnarl different. They pull from influences differently. So I mean, like, it's one of the reasons that I love studying it because I have stuff to study for decades. It's just so much, you know what I mean? So I'm on Outkast now, but starting to look at Crit. Right. The way that Crit thinks about it, you know what I mean, is something to talk about. So Yeah.
Right, right. So let me ask you, we kind of, time is wrapping up, and like I said, we're going to figure this out, and we're all going to, be following you and the next project. Tell us a little bit about the project. So what can we expect in 2021 when Chronicling Stankonia comes out? What can we expect out of that project?
You're gonna get a whole bunch of Facebook Lives when I open that bit. I don't even drink like that, man. But I might have to go sneak. I might have to go sneak a dark.
We're gonna drink for you right here, sister.
No, don't drink for
We're
me.
gonna drink to that then, Chronicling Stankonia,
Gonna drink for me one good time. You know what I'm saying? I might have to go and dip into my granddad's old stock. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just hyped. So that's the first thing. But I mean, like, what Chronicling Stankonia does is it talks about outcasts and the cultural influence of outcasts and how they theorize this idea of Southernness. You know what I mean? But then I extend out into how Southern hip hop itself helps us to update conversations about the Black South after the Civil Rights Movement. And it's not a diss against the Civil Rights Movement. Like, I've had a lot of older, whenever I do share work from the book, a lot of older folks kind of get in their feelings at first because they feel like I'm trying to discount what the work was in the 1950s and 1960s in the South. And I can never do that because my grandparents raised me. You know what I mean? Like, I was, I was never not privy to or not put on game about the sacrifices that protesters of the Civil Rights Movement made. You know what I mean? What I hope that Chronicling Stankonia will do is to connect the dots. Like, what happens in the South after the Civil Rights Movement? It's a question that most folks don't ask because there's an assumption that, you have these major markers of Southern identity that folks are comfortable with, right? So it's like you got slavery, the antebellum era, you got the Jim Crow era, you got the Civil Rights Movement, and then it goes, like radio silence. Like, what happened in the South? Right. And then, like, folks are like, oh, well, they ain't doing nothing in the South. You know what I mean? Like, we're just down here being traumatized and scared of white folks and all of the, you know what I mean? The reality of that is that a lot of the protests that you heard about nationally were still happening in pockets across the South. It just wasn't on the radar of mass media. And then you also have, folks are moving on, folks are having kids, new generations of Southerners are starting to develop. Well, how do we think about what we're seeing, what we're engaging? It's hip hop.
Right.
Hip hop. You know what I mean? Like, and I opened the book with the example that, I was a transplant to Albany. Like, I lived in Alexandria, Virginia until I was 14. And then I moved to Albany right before I started high school. But it was like, I thought I was doing something because I was carrying my radio mixtapes with all this New York hip hop on it to Southwest Georgia.
Right.
I was trying to connect with my classmates. I was like, yeah, Wu-Tang and they looking at me like,
right.
What?
Right.
What that 3-6 that cuz? What that little John and the Eastside Boy that? You know what I'm saying? Like, who is you? You need to slow all of this down.
Right.
So it became like life and death. It was like, okay, they ain't listening to who they was listening to up in Virginia. I need to figure this out real quick. So I would be glued to my radio with multiple blank tapes. So, like, one tape I remember is I had, I think it was like Wyclef Jean's Gone Till November. And then, like, it gets cut off with 3-6 Mafia's Tear the Club Up. So, I mean, like, you saw, like, the transition starting to happen.
Right.
I was in high school and college when, for a lot of folks, that is the golden era of Southern hip hop. You know what I mean? Like, I was coming of age in this golden era. So it was like Outkast still had new music coming out. We got these folks out of here, out of Louisiana. Cash Money. What? Okay, Let's run it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's all of these things were like happening simultaneously. And I just feel like sometimes I feel like the universe and the ancestors were like, all right, we're going to make you go live through this so you can theorize this in your shit later. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I do.
And that's probably the best way. That's probably the best way.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I mean, I take what's interesting to me about the Black South and I analyzed it. Outkast is one of the most prominent, necessary groups in hip hop, and I'll die on that hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're looking at them in the academy, there's nothing out there. Not really. You know what I mean? Like, there's not really anything out there. So, I mean, it was like, oh, let me run this. Kiese Layman is one of my favorite writers ever. brothers from Mississippi. You read Long Division. How does he open Long Division? With Outkast. What?
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me see what I can do with that. Jasmine Ward, we know her now for Sing Unburied Sing, which is great. But her first novel was a trap novel because it was two twins. One went to the trap, one was trying to work on the docks. How did she start that out? With Pastor Troy, with vice versa. You know what I mean? So it was just like, it came unto me, Jay. Like all of the influence came unto me and like, how are they all in conversation with each other? What is this saying about this idea of a hip hop South? And ultimately, hopefully, the thing I want people to take away from Chronicling Stankonia is that the South has a cultural influence that's grounded in hip hop.
Right.
That's it.
Right. No, I mean that's real, and that's why people respect you so much, and I love you so much and respect you so much, is because you identified with the art, but like I say, you're organically a part of it, and so what you theorize is that is sort of how you ingest it and digest it, right? And then as you look around how others are, and then you're trying to figure out what are the connections and the nexuses and that kind of thing. And so we all are excited for Chronicling Stankonia. If you pay attention, if you just joined in late, we are actually, unfortunately, closing an interview with Dr. Regina Bradley, and she just told us about her 2021 piece, Chronicling Stankonia, The Rise of the Hip Hop South. And so we're going to be keeping an eye on that and certainly bring it up to you. So since you not drinking yet, we're going to drink to that one more time, though, Sister
No, so probably one time.
One more time for my sister Regina. Listen, thank you for your time. Like I said, we were sorry about that little brief moment of technology problems. We'll figure it out. And if there is some editing we'll make sure we knock that out for you. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for all that you do in the classroom and outside the classroom. Thank you for being a phenomenal colleague, for being sort of so fundamental to the hip hop education culture. I'm an old head, right? I'm dying out. And so I'm gonna let y'all just do y'all thing. And I'm appreciative of you. You have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And thank you for stopping through the Straight No Chaser.
I appreciate y'all. Y'all turn up for me one good time with the what y'all
What
drinking on though?
Hey, Hope. And Dr. Bradley, I just want to thank you because within your interview, you made it evident that not only is hip hop a culture, but it's an energy. So I just thank you for that because you came through. How the kids say it, turn, lit, ready.
I appreciate it.
All right, you take care, Regina.
All right, now y'all be easy. Thank you so much.
All right.